Longtime Covenant College professor Lou Voskuil developed a very helpful graphic organizer to enable students to better make sense of the connection between a community or a culture's artifacts, what that community leaves behind, and its foundational belief system. His culture box, as he called it, or sometimes people referenced it as Voskuil's culture box or Voskuil's culture window, is essentially a rectangle made up of four compartments that are stacked one on top of the other. On the bottom of this culture box, the bottommost rectangle within the larger rectangle, Voskuil put beliefs. He would say that a culture, a community, has certain beliefs that are the foundation of that culture, that community. And then on top of that, he would say you have the culture's values. The values are based upon the beliefs of that culture. And then the values they provide the basis for the institutions that the culture creates. That's the third from the bottom. So at the bottom, once again, beliefs, and then on top of that, values, and then on top of that, institutions. And then an institution creates artifacts. It creates different tools. It creates many different things that community leaves behind. Now, Voskuil, as an archaeologist, often felt that this was a useful tool, that you would find a archaeological artifact, and you would say, well, what sort of institution would have left behind this artifact? And then you start saying, well, what would a culture value in order to have such institutions? And then in the same way, you would have to say, well, what must a culture believe? What must be the foundational beliefs of a culture to have those values that would inform those institutions, which would leave behind those artifacts? So, as an example, you could take the Constitution of the United States. It's one of our cultures, it's one of our artifacts. And let's say hundreds and hundreds of years in the future, we're a culture to find, or archaeologists to find the Constitution of the United States. They could say, well, what would be the institution that would have created this artifact? Well, we know it's the Continental Congress. It's a democratic government, that it has got three branches, that this is what has created the Constitution. That would be this institution. Well, what must a culture value in order to have a Continental Congress or a democratic republic, a representative government? Well, obviously, we must value individual rights. We value perspective. We value the right to vote. Now, obviously, we understand that in our history, that at the time, we didn't value all people's rights. We gave those rights predominantly to white men, to landowners. That we understand some of the challenges with that, but at the end of the day, we understand that there were certain values that would have created that sort of government. And then we understand that there must be beliefs underneath those values. Well, what would a culture that has a Continental Congress, a representative government that must value human rights, that values the rights, the freedoms of speeches and inherent dignities, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, as we see in the Declaration, what must a culture believe in order to have these values? Well, obviously, we believe that humans have profound dignity. That a culture that believes that humans have profound dignity is going to leave behind certain artifacts. And similarly, you could say go to Rome and see the great Colosseum. And you would say, well, obviously they couldn't value that all people have dignity because of this artifact where people were killed, and that was entertainment. I think that Voskuil's culture box is very helpful because it allows us to understand that whatever artifacts we have, what we leave behind, it is linked to our beliefs, and that's a profoundly useful worldview tool. I think it's important for us to also look at our institutions, especially as we talk a lot about Christian education. You could even think about your family. What are the artifacts that your culture, your family, your institution, your school has left behind? What would be the rhythms? That could be a sort of artifact. The fact that you may go to church every week, that is one of your artifacts of your family. The different pictures and things like that, those are the artifacts. Well, that's the institution. Well, what does your family or your school value? And what does your school or your family believe? Let's say that your family rests on Sunday, that you don't work on Sunday because you believe what the Bible says that God intended us to have one day in seven where we surrender and we rest because we recognize that God is God and we are not. And He made us for rest. And it's also looking forward to the rest that is yet to come. That I think it's very important to use kind of this graphic organizer as we think about our different institutions and the artifacts that we are creating. Often, I think that as Christian schools, because that's a lot of the work that we do at Renew Education, we talk about Christian schools. I think that we have a lot of artifacts that we produce that aren't necessarily linked to our beliefs. Well, they are linked to our beliefs, but they would be beliefs that would be inconsistent with the beliefs that we actually would hope that we would say are our foundation, that there's inconsistency. Well, all of our artifacts are always linked to beliefs. They all are. There is no such thing as neutrality in those. And so I think it's important for us to kind of do that backwards design and say, well, let's look at some of our artifacts and what is that saying about our beliefs? I know we would like to say that we believe certain things, but what are our artifacts saying about our beliefs? I think that's one way, one direction for us to go, not only maybe in our schools, but also in our churches and our families. But I think it goes the other way too, to say, we know we believe certain things. So, what sort of artifacts should we be producing? Should we be leaving behind? Should we be known by? And I think that's another way to look at those artifacts. What are those things that we are known by? And understand that there is that link between, once again, it's faith and actions, or it's belief and actions. I do think that you could even further refine that idea of beliefs and add to it our desires and our longings, because we are not just thinking beings, we're also desiring beings, as St. Augustine, James K. A. Smith, other people would say. Once again, Voskuil's culture box, this culture window, this graphic organizer made up of multiple different sort of rectangles that are stacked on top of each other, I think it's a very helpful thing for us to think about, to go back routinely, to revisit it and say, let's use this as sort of a way of analyzing our practice. It's analyzing what we produce. I think that Christians especially need to constantly have these sorts of helpful tools for us to say, let's look honestly at what we are known by, what we're leaving behind. I hope this is helpful. Continue to reach out to us. Let us know by the different ways that Renew Education can partner with you, your school, your family, your church. And it is a joy to be able to look at some of these tools and provide these resources. Thanks so much for listening to our show. If you like what you heard, subscribe, leave us a comment, or share with a friend. To find out more about Renew Education, visit our website at www.renew-education.org. Watch us on our YouTube channel for various podcast episodes, YouTube shorts, and Worldview brieflies. And you can listen to our show wherever podcast episodes are found.